Welcome to the course. I am Brad DeLong. This is my basement in the Elmwood neighborhood of Berkeley, near Ashby College, about a mile south of the campus and about a mile north of the Rockridge BART. Actually, this is not what it looks like now. This is a picture I took last May. What does it look right now? Well, right now, behind myself, as I sit at my basement desk, I have hung a green blanket. Why? To give the microprocessor in my laptop a fighting chance of distinguishing me from the background so that it can then do visual tricks to hopefully keep you somewhat engaged and slightly amused, and thus help you in the process of educating yourself. What kind of tricks am I hoping to do? Well, I'm not hoping to do, much of the time, tricks like this. We can do them. They're fun. This is a background against which, famously, a fellowship was assigned a task in a historically important movie. What was the task? This one. But most of the time here, you will see backgrounds that are less, shall we say, overwhelming, while still, I hope, being visually interesting and informative. And most of the time, I am going to try to look normal and not like some kind of green force ghost. Thus, most of the times you will see illustrations that we hope will be both visually interesting and informative. This, for example, shows week by week from March to July 2020, how many American workers received unemployment insurance last week who had also received it the week before that. The collapse of employment and the rise of unemployment when the coronavirus plague hit was absolutely stunning. Back in 2009, we had thought that the collapse of employment and the rise of unemployment then was stunningly big and stunningly fast. We were like then Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. We knew nothing. Now, I haven't just shown you a slide here. I've shown you my voice, my face, my eyes, my mouth. Why have I filled your ears with the first and put the others in front of your eyes, albeit off here in a corner? Why have I not simply, in fact, assigned you some books? Why are we doing video or slideshows at all? Why have I not simply assigned you some books and then said, the exam will be in early December and left you to do your thing? Why are we making you glue your eyes to these screens? I have done so because we are built to find human faces and human voices uniquely arresting, interesting, and attention-focusing. And it turns out that in this strange time, we need to arrest, interest, and focus your attention. We can't do it purely through books. We can't do it purely through books because books, books are a lot of the time boring. In-person faces, gestures, and voices are a lot of the time much better. How do we know this? Well, we know this because of the history of the university. We know this especially because the university survived the coming of printing. Let's back up first 1,000, in fact, let's back up 1,700 years. Back 1,000 years ago, when universities as we know them got their start, books were really, really expensive. The most comprehensive record of prices, or rather of what it was thought prices ought to be, that we have in the distant past comes from an edict issued 1,700 years ago, from an edict issued in the year 301 by the man who stabilized and refounded the Roman Empire and gave it more centuries of life, the Emperor Diocletian. In his price edict, he limited how much a scribe could charge for producing a copy of a book to 25 denarii to write 100 lines. What is the context of this number, 25 denarii? The context is that back then a 2.2 loaf of bread, 1 kilogram, cost 13 denarii, and that back then to hire an unskilled worker for the day cost 36 denarii. A cheap book, the kind of thing you could get for, say, $10 today, thus cost the same as 440 pounds of bread, or 70 days' work at the minimum wage. Compared to today, when a cheap book costs the same as 5 pounds of bread, or 40 minutes work at the minimum wage. Now, with books so expensive, how then did you get educated? Unless you were already very rich to start with. The answer back then was that you had to travel to where the books were. With a cheap book costing the same proportion of the daily wage then as, we can do the arithmetic, 70 days times 10 hours a day times $15 an hour equals $10,500, with a cheap book costing having the relative price back then of $10,000 today as a proportion of the daily wage, and with expensive, high quality, durable books costing much more. How many books you needed to read, how many copies of, say, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, do you think existed at that price in Western Scotland in 1460? And so you traveled to the University of Glasgow, and there you and all the others who back then wanted to learn about Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics listened to somebody read it around, legate it, in what came to be called a lecture, while you took your notes on it. Because afterwards, your memory and your notes would be the only contact you had with Aristotle's ideas. You certainly could not afford to spend the equivalent of $10,500 a book for anything other than your very most favorite and very most loved books. That was the origin of the university. Get people together to hear books read aloud. That was how universities got their start, back when books were really expensive. They were the only places you could read a few unpopular books in the library and listen to the popular books being read aloud in the lectures. But then came Johann Gutenberg and the printing press and movable type, and books became really, really cheap. You could have your library and read your books almost anywhere. Yet universities did not disappear and lectures did not disappear. They lost their principal purpose of economizing on the number of copies of a book a university needed to get to function, but they found alternative uses. They became ways of getting people to go over again in their minds what they had read, structured repetition as a learning aid. They became ways of getting people to think actively about the ideas being put forward and to connect those ideas to things in their own mind. Ways of getting people to engage in dialogues, real or imaginary, about the ideas. Ways of mobilizing human group solidarity for the educational process. But we can no longer do that. We can no longer gather in lectures. Or rather, we do not want to run the risks involved in bringing all 100,000 or so people back to the Berkeley campus in the fall and have us act as we normally do, because we think that if we do so, 60,000 of us will get sick and 500 of us, largely elderly professors and staff, will die. What are we doing? What are we doing instead? The problem is making this work is very hard. The university is actually a very good device for bringing us together and making us not only read books and listen to people, but think hard about what we're reading and listening to and making it part of our own minds. Moving to screens, even screens of faces and voices, on screen, the problem is that making this work is very hard. We saw how hard it was a decade ago. A decade ago, there was a big MOOC movement. Massively open online courses were supposed to replace at least the in-person lecture course. And there were some or thought or hoped that they would radically replace or at least transform the expensive university and greatly democratize education. They didn't. Why not? Well, it turned out to be very important to, one, get people together to do things on groups. Two, get people in the classroom in contact with each other out of the classroom. And three, arrest and focus attention with live, not pre-recorded, live human voices and faces. And as you know, if you've thought about the difference between in-person plays and on-screen movies, say, there are lots and lots of subtle and important ways in which our screen technologies just do not cut it. Now, it can be done. The team The team, of which my first cousin Phil Lord down in LA was one of the heads, they did it. They won their Oscar. But they spent $500,000 per minute creating Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Do that, spend that much money, and you can create something that is fully immersive and, in fact, more effective than anything we in the university can put on in person. Of course, you need more than money. You need genius too, and you need a lot of luck. How much luck do you need? Well, consider another movie, Solo, a Star Wars story. The team composed of Phil and company were supposed to be making that movie. They were bounced out of the project in the middle by Disney executives due to, quote, creative differences, unquote. As I understand it, and I may be wrong, they had proposed to make a Star Wars movie that was a lot more like what Guardians of the Galaxy, that movie, had been. They were given the green light to do so, but in the middle of the project, the Disney executives decided that the movie that they did, that decided with respect to that movie, that even though they had ordered a Guardians of the Galaxy-like Star Wars movie, they did not want to eat that. So we will never see Phil, Chris, and the rest of the team's view of the Han Solo origin story. Instead, we have a movie that lost Disney $80 million and that brought a screaming halt to a number of projects. In fact, to all of what was supposed to be a series of future Star Wars origin spin-offs. The moral? Making convincing and arresting video is very hard if we want to attract your attention, to engage you, to produce as good an experience for you as you get in the in-person university. We thus have a very uphill climb here, at least those of us on this side of the camera. We don't have $500,000 a minute to spend. And we here are not creative geniuses like my first cousin Phil and the team he's assembled are. American universities are frantically piling online right now so that we can keep teaching somehow. And as we do so, we face this intellectual crisis about how to do our job through a screen, which is a very, very difficult task. And unless until we successfully figure out how to do our job through a screen, we are going to make a total hash of moving online. Hence this first preliminary module of the course, headed by this first preliminary video. Think of it as a meta module, a how are we going to try to learn this semester module, a learning how to learn module. But this won't just be navel-gazing at the educational process. Also, in this module, I ask and suggest some possible answers to the questions, what is economics, and what is economics good for? So once again, welcome. I very much hope you learn stuff here, wherever here is for you. And I very much hope you also have at least some fun here this semester.